Hey y'all, and welcome to this next video interview in what's going to be a three-part installment of education funding and issues related to public education in North Carolina, but also in our country. So, the first installment was when we spoke a couple weeks ago about the Wake County School Board here in North Carolina considering cuts to special education, and that was stopped for now, and we're pending a new budget and what they're going to say. In today's interview, Dr. Melanie McCabe, a psychologist colleague of mine, and I are talking with Julie von Haefen, who is currently serving in the North Carolina House of Representatives. Julie and I do go way back. We were PTA moms together. She was the president of the PTA at my son's elementary school when he started there, and then I later became PTA president a few years after her kids had left. So we have kept in touch and are both very passionate about public education. So I knew she was the person that I wanted to talk with. And so Dr. McCabe and I both come to this from mental health and school psychology perspectives. And I hope that you all enjoy this conversation, but also learn a lot about how the money flows, how it works, where is the lottery money we talk about in North Carolina. And we also go off on a few tangents related to mental health and school violence, and how we can just really get to know our representatives and learn more about the issues that they are talking about every day, and so that we can get to know them as humans. So I hope you walk away from this interview with some new knowledge. Our third installment is going to be talking with a county commissioner here in Wake County so that you can fully understand these three buckets of money that go into our public schools: the federal and the state, and then the county. So comment below if you have any questions or you want any more information about anything we say in this video, and I hope you find it helpful.
So many of the parents that I work with in my practice and that follow me on social media want to know what they can do. And so I guess I want to start with that like big question of like, what's the best thing a parent, no matter if your child is in public school or maybe you're a parent in private school wondering where your tax money is going in North Carolina, or I mean, once I go down this rabbit hole, I'm like, or everybody, like, don't you want your money to pay for education? Like, so I don't know, where would you start in telling people what they can actually do, Julie?
I mean, I think you're right that a lot of parents and people in general feel a little overwhelmed right now by the kind of where to start in this process. And I think that, people think they have to do big, amazing things like to make a difference, but it really can just start with honestly getting involved at the most like micro level. I started out, my work in this field as a PTA volunteer at my own kid's school. And that kind of just leads, it can lead places, right? Like you
Mm-hmm.
can start getting to know your kid's principal, and like learning more about how administration works just at the school level. You can start getting to know the teachers in your school and like what challenges that they face, on a daily basis. You can, volunteer in the classroom or in the media center, which is where I started, just shelving books, at my kid's school. And it just really gets, I think it helps you become better familiar with the issues and the challenges that our education system is facing. So if you feel a little overwhelmed with like going to like the legislature or going to a school board meeting, like start with something that feels more comfortable, just in your own backyard in your own school. And also, getting to know other parents, whether that's through a PTA, at your kid's school or a PTO or just, I'm sure at most schools, whether you're private, public, they all have parent groups that you can get involved with. And I think that camaraderie and like that feeling that like, okay, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one feeling this way really helps people, move forward in the process of their advocacy life. I think that, for me as somebody who came from advocacy and now I'm in the legislature, what I see is that people don't have relationships with their legislators. They don't
Mhm.
know them on a personal level. So I'm like really glad that you guys reached out to me to kind of just get to know me and like what motivates me, because I think that that is the most effective advocacy when you really know the person that you're talking to, and you develop that relationship. A lot of people will come to us, when they're demanding something or where they're, asking for a specific thing or about a bill. If you don't start there, but you actually start way before that and kind of just, we've been off session for several months now. Like this would be the time that like people should be like, hey, let's grab a coffee, or like, I love to get to know you better. Like, let's talk about, this issue. For me, like that's the part I love is like getting to know my constituents and like, having them reach out and develop those relationships so that later when you do want something or you have an ask, like you're not just a stranger coming out of the dark, like you actually know that person and you can be like, hey, can we meet? I really want to talk to you about this issue. Like, for example, with Wake County Schools with the special education cuts, that's a perfect example of like, if you already knew your school board member, for example, and then that came up kind of suddenly, you could just, give them a call or, send them an email and they already know you and like that your kid has special needs and that you have these concerns. So I guess, you don't have to make big moves, but I think relationships matter.
Mhm.
And then also just starting small.
That's such good advice. And I don't think people realize they can contact their representatives and even their school board members. One of the reasons I made that summary video the morning after the Wake County special session they had on the special education proposal for the budget cuts was because I felt so represented by the school board that night. They really pushed back. They really gave all these examples of how they're listening to people, they're listening to teachers, they're in schools, they're listening to parents, and I think people don't realize that, it's not as it's different than the whole state legislature, of course, and that's why we want to ask you some questions today. But you can at least start to get comfortable with these
Mhm.
people. So, because they're all just humans trying to stand up for, what they think their constituents want and what they think is right. So, what would you say? That just reminds me before I go on, it reminds me of like our work together, Julie, when we were in the PTA, when you were saying get into your kids' school. One of the things that I learned, I am not a finance person. Anybody who knows me knows like I am like a people feelings writing person. Like I don't know, like don't let me do your taxes. Like I am not that person. So when it comes to budgets, um that's the thing I learned the most. I couldn't make any significant decisions about like how it should be balanced, but what I learned when I was in the PTA talking to the board and the principal is just the logistics of how the money flows, and principals do have the power to make some decisions and to listen to the PTA board, and then you go on up from that, and the school board and the county. We're going to be talking with Cheryl Stallings later to ask about how the county commissioners make those decisions. So I guess that would be my next question for someone like me who like is like I don't know anything about finances. What would you say, or how is the best way to help people understand what's happening with this, like North Carolina not passing the budget and like all the issues that that's causing right now? I mean, everyone's mad about it, right? But like, what are the actual problems that people may not realize?
As in, like, why isn't the budget getting passed?
Well,
Or,
we can start there. Yeah.
okay.
But then, like, I mean, we see it from our side
Yeah.
as, the teacher's not getting paid, there's programs getting cut, like all that stuff. But I think a lot of people, especially parents who don't fully understand, like, the positions on all of it, like, how can people not be for this? Like, what's the deal? Yeah.
Well, I mean, as far as this year's budget, I would say that, the reason that we haven't passed it, it just comes down to a disagreement between House and Senate Republicans over tax policy. That's like my 10-word answer
Yeah.
that we have like, and that's very like basic dumbing it down, but like that's really what it's come down to, as well as like some other peripheral issues. Like the Senate wants to fund like the new children's hospital in Apex, like with state money, and the House Republicans don't want to. So that's also part of it. But the tax policy comes down to the fact that Republicans have passed these triggers for our income tax. That if we make a certain amount of revenue in the state, that we'll continue to cut taxes, and they're automatic triggers. So if we hit this revenue mark, that it will cut our income tax like another quarter point, and it continues to go down. Well, what's happened is that because our state is growing and we have more and more needs, those triggers are not working so well anymore because we're not bringing in enough money basically to fund the state at the levels that we need to with population growth, inflation, all those other things. And so the House Republicans have kind of put their foot down and said, we need to pause these triggers and like kind of figure out, where we are at this point. And the Senate Republicans have said, nope, we're doing it. Like we're barreling forward. We don't really care what staff is telling us about an impending fiscal cliff, which is very concerning. So to be honest, I am much more on the side of the House Republicans in this fight, because I do think that we need to pause these triggers because obviously we've seen that we don't have enough money to operate, everything that we need to at this point. And so that's really what it's come down to. The House Republicans have kind of dug in and said, we're not going to vote for your budget. And the Senate Republicans have said, we're not going to vote for your budget. And so that it's just kind of a deadlock at this point. So, I think there's political things that come into play. Like we have a new speaker this year, and I think he's trying to kind of establish his, uh, leadership style with the Senate. There's always kind of those disagreements between the two chambers on a lot of different things. And then, of course, we know our Senate president lost his primary, and so he won't be in office after this year. So it's a lot of dynamics going on. So we'll see. But as far as the budgeting process, like I don't think the one thing I wanted to mention, and I don't think a lot of people realize, is that, we passed a law several years ago that our state continues to operate if we don't pass the budget under the last biennium budget. But one, that doesn't account for, that means there's no raises. So like teachers are still, teaching under a 2023 salary with 2026 prices. Second of all, any non-recurring funding. So in the budget, there's recurring funding and non-recurring funding. If it's non-recurring, that means we have to approve it every single biennium. So anything that was non-recurring in the 2023 budget has ended. They have all those grants and all these groups that get money from the state. That's all stopped. But I will say the one thing that hasn't stopped is funding for private school vouchers. That is a recurring funding source that has not stopped growing, even though we haven't passed a budget. And that funding group is getting their money, and it's increasing every year, regardless of whether we pass a budget or not. And I think that's a major problem in the fact that our teacher salaries are not recurring, or they're recurring, but they don't increase, whereas the private school voucher program does.
Let's talk about it. Yeah, go ahead, Mel.
I would love to know, because I'm new to this scene and learning in this space, so I feel so lucky to be able to learn from you. Why do I, as a parent of a middle schooler in Wake County Public Schools, give a rip about that?
About private school vouchers?
Yeah.
Because we're spending over $1 billion a year on private school vouchers that should be going to our public schools, because our public schools we're constitutionally obligated to fund them, and we're not doing that at the levels that, a lot of people think that we should be. Now, I'm sure you all know about the case that just came out with the Supreme Court, around Leandro. So Leandro basically said that, the legislature was not funding schools adequately and had ordered them to like put a lot more money into the schools several years ago. But unfortunately, that decision was overturned, and the case was basically dismissed by the Supreme Court a couple weeks ago. That doesn't mean that, their decision didn't say that we weren't funding schools, that they kind of used a procedural, loophole to dismiss the case. So, we know that, our public schools are not being adequately funded. And 85% of kids in North Carolina go to public schools. So to me, that's our number one obligation, and the reason that the private school voucher program is so harmful is that we're basically diverting, that $1 billion a year that could be used for our public schools.
And
And so that's
Julie,
not
go
making
ahead.
it into the school buildings here in Wake County as well, right? Like, because it's not trickling down from the state because it's going somewhere else, which
Right. Yeah.
means less funding for schools to hire other staff and continuing education and all of that, right?
Well, you think about what $1 billion a year could do to
I had
for
to
our
think about the
public
number of
schools.
zeros in that, Julie. There's so many zeros in 1 billion.
There's a lot. And,
Yeah.
over the next 10 years, we're going to spend, up to like 8 billion, I think it is, on this program. And, we could get into all that around, the fact that private schools, are unaccountable. They don't, there's so many things about
Yeah.
private schools that, I disagree with, but, you know, if people want to go to private schools, that's completely fine. Very much disagree with the fact that I, as a taxpayer, need to help you go there.
Right. And I wanted to clarify, as I try to always do when I talk about this, the difference between private vouchers and the ESA grant for families. So the ESA grants are for children who have IEPs, who need a different setting, and there are just logistically some things about public schools, usually the size of the classroom, the size of the building, the overwhelm of those settings that will lead some kids to need a specialized private option. And I am all for that. And that existed before the private vouchers were expanded. So, what we're talking about is children that do not have disabilities, children who live in families, no matter what their family's income is, and basically subsidizing their choice to go to private school with our taxpayer money. And then,
Yes.
will you explain, Julie, because I've talked to other people about this, how because it's statewide, I think it's possible for like in rural parts of the state, taxpayer money is actually paying for, let's say, a private school child in Raleigh or Charlotte because they don't even have access to private schools in their area. Is that true?
Yeah, that's right. I think there's about 30 counties in North Carolina that have no private schools at all. And what's ironic about this whole thing, and really honestly sad, is that a lot of the people who vote in favor of the private school voucher program do represent and live in counties that their own constituents are not benefiting from this, and it's actually hurting them because their public schools are not getting that funding, that they're sending basically to like the three largest counties in the state, which have the majority of private schools. I don't understand it. I just think that you're like voting against your own constituents and the kids that live in your district. And so we've tried to like get that word out. Like I've actually gone to a couple like rural counties around the state and tried to talk to people about this. And it's always an eye opener. I don't think that people really
Mhm.
realize that when you actually like tell them how it's hurting their own areas. So
Yeah.
yeah. And
Yeah.
thank you for um distinguishing between an ESA and a private voucher, because I'm definitely in favor of like the ESAs, and like that definitely there are kids that benefit from different learning environments, so I don't want to you know um I want to distinguish between those situations for
Yeah, I
sure,
mean,
so thank you.
my like 10-word answer is always I am all for people being able to go to school wherever they need to go, as long as, this is way more than 10 words,
Yeah,
as long as the public schools are fully funded and all these kids have what they need, if there's money left over, but there won't be,
yeah,
you know.
because a lot of
Anyway,
private schools, like, they're not required to provide special education
yeah, so that's
services.
where I get on my soapbox
Hmm.
because I assume at some point, someone's going to sue a private school, right? Like, you can't, if a child with a disability is getting public money to go to a private school, and then at some point, some private school is going to be like, we can't serve you, it makes
Yeah,
sense that the parent would sue about that. But anyway, that's kind of a,
they might have already. Yeah, exactly.
they
And
may
I
have,
mean,
yeah, I don't know.
and private schools discriminate too, like
Right.
blatantly, because they're private
They're
institutions. So,
allowed
like, they
to.
can exclude you from attending there for many reasons, religious, sexual orientation, all those kind of things. So, I don't want to be supporting places like that with my tax money.
Right.
Exactly.
I think
Exactly.
something that was really eye-opening for me is when somebody explained it to me in dollars and cents and said, the kids that tend to whose parents tend to pull them to private school, so they have a different experience in private school, not ESA. Yeah, ESA, is that right? ESA?
ESA.
Yeah, so not the kiddos who are impacted by ESA. The other folks, they are the least expensive to educate already because these kiddos are the ones who have support at home. They may be performing at a higher academic level. And when we pull those kiddos out of the school system, there's less resources around for the kiddos who might need more support. So you're pulling a disproportionate amount of like needed funding out.
Yeah, because that then the school is not getting that money for that student.
Hmm.
And schools, have to run no matter how many students they have, so like the less students in that building, the less money that principal is having to budget for that school.
And I think
Right.
that's one of the reasons why we're seeing such a difficult time in Wake County. I was reading the news yesterday. Wake County is considering changing the schedules of 8 schools because
Yeah.
of enrollment. It's having a real impact.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I saw that too. Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, public school enrollment has dropped, over the last few years. And honestly, that's a direct, correlation to the messaging that's been coming out of our state legislature around, that our public schools are failing kids and their teachers are indoctrinating kids. And, so that does get into the psyche of parents. And I think they start questioning, whether public schools are the best place. And I mean, it is just a smear campaign, to be honest,
Hmm.
against what's going on. Because if you keep saying that something's failing and then you don't fund it, it's just a circle, right? Like it never stops. And so we have to break that cycle. And so that's, one thing we try to do, or, public school advocates try to do is tell the good stories about,
Hmm.
their public school. And I would add that to how we kind of started, when you said, how can parents, advocate is spreading the good news,
Yeah.
about your public school and your teachers and the great things that are going on there. Because again, we have to break that message cycle that, there's something wrong in our public schools.
Yeah. I mean, y'all know this. I graduated from Wake County Public Schools, and my kids are in Wake County. I think all of our kids are in Wake County Public Schools, and it's it's been wonderful. And it's like I've only seen the stress of teachers in these last few years. And I know that it's because they're being asked to do more with less and not being compensated for it, right? So I think the last time I read about this or watched a summary about this, I was thinking of trying to think of helping people understand the different buckets of money. And I think when I was watching like federal, state, county, that most of the money comes from state. Is that
Mhm.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest problem right now. I mean, there's problems across the nation, of course, but that's our biggest problem in North Carolina, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the federal money is a very small part, and it's usually around Title I schools and special
Right.
education. But really, the bulk of like per pupil spending, materials, all those kind of things come from the state. And under our constitution and our laws, the counties are really only supposed to be funding the infrastructure, the buildings, and all like the things that come with infrastructure for schools. They're not supposed to be paying for teacher salaries. That is strictly supposed to be from the state. But, and as you all know, like that has definitely changed over the years where now counties are being relied on way too heavily, to supplement teacher salaries. And that's also where we get into this, drastic and growing inequity across our districts in North Carolina because so many counties just don't have the property tax base, they don't have the revenue to give those teachers that supplement. And so they're literally working on that state salary schedule
Hmm.
without much, if anything, of a supplement. And so, we're seeing them losing lots of teachers because they just can't, those teachers can't afford to live and work there. And, in Wake County, we've been fortunate because we have a very pro public school commission who has, generously supported our schools. But that is not the way we are supposed to be funding our schools at all. And now we've been hearing in the news that the legislature wants to, limit what the counties can take in property taxes. And it just blows my mind because they're saying that, the counties are taxing too heavily. I'm like, because you guys have not funded the things that you need to fund, and you're pushing that obligation down to the counties. And so they're having to raise more revenue. And it blows my mind that like they're blaming, these counties when it's really their fault, for not
Hmm.
doing what they're supposed to legally do.
Yeah, totally. And that's what breaks my heart too about public, this is supposed to be public education across the state, right? Thank you for explaining that because I think people don't fully understand why it's different in different counties, and it's because of counties trying to, figure that out, and then that coming from property taxes, right? That
Yeah.
county money coming from property taxes.
That's the only way that they can, raise revenue. They can't, do like an income tax or anything like that. So property taxes are their one method of
Hmm.
raising revenue for their county. And, it's not just schools that they're funding. They fund a lot of public safety. And I think that also people don't understand that. Like, they're like, oh yeah, my property taxes are going up way too high. We need to stop that. Well, when you need an ambulance at your house and nobody comes, I think you're not going to be too happy about that. Like, there's a lot of retired people who say, well, why am I paying for schools? Well, you're not just paying for schools, you're paying for a lot of
Hmm.
other things. So
Hmm. So, where does the lottery money go, Julie? Do you know?
that could be a whole nother hour
That's maybe a whole
conversation.
nother hour, but people ask me that a lot
Yeah.
because I don't know if it's like a lack of
It's a
transparency, or like you see the lottery everywhere for education and you're
yes.
like, where?
It's
Yeah.
a good marketing campaign, that's for sure. Unfortunately, when we passed the lottery bill, several years ago, this is before I was in the legislature, but the bill originally said that the money, the revenue or the profit from the lottery had to be used for education. Now it is not a have to use, it is can use. And
Mm.
so it's not like a one for one. It's not like that profit goes into a fund that's directly used for education. It basically just goes into the pot, like the huge pot. And then it's still up to the legislature, how to distribute that money. So it's not like this is directed, to this item. It's more like, when in your own household, it just goes into your purse and then you kind of just spend it, right? Like it's not like directed money. So it should have been when we originally passed the lottery bill, but unfortunately, at the very last minute, what I've heard is that they kind of tweak that so it is a little bit more flexible in how they can spend that money. So I'm
Mm.
So
sure
it's
some of it is spent on education, but it's not like directly, one for one spent on it.
Mhm.
so it's a misnomer. It's
Yeah.
the NC Maybe Education Lottery. Got it. Okay.
It's a marketing scheme, honestly. I mean, and all those commercials, it just drives me absolutely crazy because, they've gotten all these teachers and principals to talk about how the lottery has helped their school, and I'm like, I mean, I'm glad for them, but I'm also just like, okay, let's be a little bit more honest about it. And I'm glad the state auditor is kind of looking into that a little bit more because I think it's kind of flown under the radar for a
Yeah.
long time.
Yeah. Totally. Well, I don't want to end this conversation without talking a little bit about mental health, and I know there's the proposal for the children's hospital that's but I don't are you saying that it's not agreed on how that's getting funded yet? Okay.
No.
I mean, I know Mel and I can just say like we need more
Yes,
support.
please.
We need, I mean, Mel can talk to that because she works more with a population that is more frequently hospitalized than mine. But from where I'm sitting, we need so much more support for not just mental health for children, but also just the ripple effects of mental health for adults that, will trickle down to the kids. Like, is that all just stalled? Like the money for the hospital, and then I know the Medicaid stuff it's like being backtracked, right?
Yeah, like I said, I mean, I don't know exactly like if the hospital does not get the state money that they kind of were promised, I think it'll just probably delay the hospital because
Okay.
then they're going to have to fundraise or do other things to kind of make up for that money that they're not going to get from the state. I think there's like some of that disagreement between the local hospitals. Wake Med is feeling
Mhm.
a little bit like,
Yeah.
the stepchild because they're not part of this. And, there's a little bit of that,
Yeah.
going on, I think, behind the scenes. But I mean, I'm hoping that it moves forward. The hospital would actually be in my district, so I'm very excited about that. And it would be great for our community. Like you said, we are desperate for more hospital beds for mental
Mhm.
health. I mean, we hear from Wake Med executives all the time about, people being in the ER for days and days. I'm sure you guys know that as
Yeah.
doctors, that there's just not enough, especially for kids, I think too, like, Mel, I'm sure you could speak to that. But, yeah, and then we have a huge problem with Medicaid. We're starting our short session next week, and that is going to be, I think, one of the top, I'm hoping that's going to be one of the top issues because we are facing, that deficit in Medicaid. And every year, basically, the state has to kick into the Medicaid program. And I think we're about $300 million short of what we needed to do. And I just saw an interview with our DHHS secretary on the news the other night, and he said basically in May we're going to start running out of money. And so I, I don't really know what that means for care, in our state.
Mhm.
And it's so frustrating since we worked so hard for so many years to expand Medicaid, and now we're facing, this
Mhm.
financial deficit. And then with the big beautiful bill kind of going into like all these administrative things that are going to have to be starting to be implemented around like work requirements and cuts to SNAP. And it's just a really bad situation for people. And unfortunately, I think that's only going to make, mental health like worse in the state. When we
Mhm.
expanded Medicaid, we did get a lot of money that was supposed to go to mental health in North Carolina. And I think there has been some things going on, but unfortunately, again, like things like the Healthy Opportunities Pilot, which was an amazing program, where it's mostly like wraparound services. Like we're not just going to focus on mental health, we're going to also focus on like social determinants of health and like all these other things and physical health. Like you guys know, it's all part of like one holistic uh, thing to help care for people. And that pilot was an amazing program, but it got cut because of financial, worries. So we're just facing a lot of issues in the state. And, I wish I could end, with this on a better note around mental health, but we hear a lot of talk in the legislature about addressing mental health, but I'm really tired of just kind of talking about
Mhm.
it and not actually putting our money, toward it.
Mhm. What can people look for in a candidate when they come vote in November, um, that could stop or correct some of these things that are happening?
So if people don't know, all 170 members of the legislature are up for re-election every 2 years. So every 2 years, we have an opportunity to make a change and to actually vote people in who are going to support, these issues. So I would say, especially for incumbents, look at their voting record. All of our votes are on the legislative website, ncleg.gov. Look up how they are voting on all, are they voting to support the private school voucher program? Are they voting to, fund mental health? Are they voting for, book bans in schools? Like all these things are public record. And so we need to be aware of like, if you are represented by somebody that you disagree with, like find out like what are they doing that you're disagreeing with, and then find the other person who's running
Hmm.
against them. We're in Wake County. There's two districts that are going to be very, very competitive this year that we are working to oust what I consider anti-public school candidates who have voted over the years that they've been there in ways that I very much disagree with. Now also, don't listen to what they say. Listen to actually know what they do. Because
Mm.
you will hear a lot of things from people that, oh, we need to raise teacher pay and we need to do this. And I heard the Speaker of the House even saying, things about raising teacher pay. But for years, they haven't done that. And now that they're facing a more competitive election, they'll say that they support this. But you got to look at what they do and not
Mm,
just what they say,
okay.
because they are in a position in the majority party that they could do these things, but they have not. And they've continually like diverted money to other things. Also, I always say if you look at your budget, that shows your values. And so you got to look at that
Mm,
budget and say like this is what their values are, and it's not the things that maybe you agree with. So just research your candidates, know what they're doing. Look at endorsements, like, people who is NCAE endorsing, who is, other groups that support issues that you care
hmm
about. There's a great new group actually that I've just been connected with called Mental Health Now. And they do like, you sign a basically statement of support that you're going to support all these things, as an elected official. And it's a national group, but they've been great, and they actually have given us a lot of resources and things to talk about the mental health issues. So things like that. I mean, there's a lot of resources out there, and I know people are busy, but do your research, talk to your friends, and you can always DM me if you need information.
That's right. And the North Carolina Psychological Association also does advocacy work. So you can go to their website and see what they're talking about. They have like committees that will, speak on behalf of mental health professionals. Yeah.
Awesome.
Anything else you want to ask, Mel? This has been so helpful.
It has been so helpful. I'm coming at this from the standpoint of, the clients that I see and their experiences. And Julie said something super helpful that I think a lot of the people in the audience may not know. If, folks that are elected do want to talk to their constituents, they want to get to know them. And so knowing there are good windows of opportunity to reach out, and that might be the way you get involved, right? Ask to have coffee with somebody, connect with them, see their values, look at their voting history, ask them about their voting history and their why,
Mhm.
and really get to decide who you might want to vote for when election time comes around.
Mhm.
Absolutely. And like the legislature, where it's an open building. Like again, I know people are busy and they don't want to spend the day at the legislature maybe, but just come down, like, spend 15 minutes, like make an appointment with your legislator or somebody that you're interested in talking to. It doesn't have to be your legislator, it can be anybody. Make a 15-minute appointment and just, like say, hey, I just want to introduce myself. Like we have a lot of issues that we both care about. How can I be helpful to you? Love to be a resource to you. I love those kind of meetings because, again, you're not there just to ask for something or whatever. You're there just to get to know each other. And I think that can be really powerful, just spending a small amount of time doing that. And even just coming to the building and going to watch a committee or watch session or something. I just think like taking the mystery out of the whole thing is also helpful for people to understand that it's not as scary. I remember the first time I went to the legislature, I was scared out of my mind. I didn't know what to expect. I remember having my first meeting with my state senator, and I thought I had to know every, detail, every fact. I thought she was gonna like quiz me on like, numbers and like, all these things. And it was just a conversation. So I think again, just taking away that mystery of the whole process, I think can be really helpful for people.
Mhm.
Bringing it back to where we started our conversation, Julie, I would love to know what were some of the first issues that you saw in the school when you started volunteering in the media center?
Oh, wow. Uh,
Like, what were your first few aha moments? And
That's a good
Molly, you as
question. I'll
well.
have to think about that too.
yeah, that's a great question. That was a long time ago.
I mean, while you think, Julie, I'll
Yeah.
answer for me. I mean,
Okay.
I remember thinking, I alluded to this before, but it was a little bit about how the money flowed. Like I remember thinking about that it was flexible, and I didn't realize it was flexible in some ways. Like we had, we were fundraising through the PTA, and then the principal had a budget. Um, and we were making really ethical decisions about like this money is supposed to do this and that money is supposed to do that. So, these were decisions that, you have to get to know the teachers, you have to get to know the issues and to figure out like, the programs you want to, and as a PTA you could like create programs like let's have this event or let's do, create, there's a need here that we need. So I just remember that feeling of like getting to know your school, getting to know the teachers, figuring out what the needs are on that very micro level of just this one school. And then, I think in many ways, any type of administration, like a principal or, of course, culturally, we feel like we're like in trouble with the principal's office. But when you get to know the principal, you realize that they're wonderful people who are making all of these big decisions that affect, morale in the building and how parents feel about things and how, just the culture of the school. So it it's that combination for me of the relationship and then the funding that was that big aha moment for me about how those are actually so very connected. Like you said, the budget is like a moral document. I've heard that
Yeah.
said before, and it's so true because the people making those decisions are able to make a call based on where that money goes.
Yeah. Yeah, as you were talking, I did think, I mean, so I think for me, like, and this is held true, whatever 15 years, or gosh, I don't know how, yeah, 15 years later,
Hmm.
because my son's like 21 now. So when he was 5, 6 years old in kindergarten. So the same thing holds true 15 years later. Our teachers do so much. I remember like being in the media center and just like shelving books. That's literally how I started like this whole thing. And, just seeing even the media center coordinator, who maybe you don't think of, so much as like a classroom teacher, but all the things that she had to do throughout the day. And, I wasn't even there all day, but like as I was there more, I saw that this, as I was in the school a lot more. It's just, like caring for the kids and like doing her administration part and then grabbing a bite to eat and then teaching a class, and it's just it's just crazy how much they do. And I think I would just like to full circle moment, like now that I started substitute teaching like during COVID, and like I'm in the classroom now as a teacher, but it now it's even worse. Like I would just say like, and that makes me so sad that like 15 years later, we're like you said before, like we're putting even more like work on these teachers and paying them less. And now they're the counselor, they're the social worker, they're the teacher, they're the parent, they're the nurse, they're the the
Hmm.
cafeteria worker. Like they're all the things. And I see that as a sub, and then as a parent, as
Hmm.
somebody who goes into schools just as an elected official. And it's just that is what like motivates me, that that starting out all those years ago shelving books, things really have not improved and have almost gotten worse. And
Hmm.
so that's why I keep doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, I was
Thank
gonna
you.
ask you. Yeah, I was asking you about subbing. I totally forgot that until you just said it and you were talking about that. Um, I've never heard of a legislator going back into the classroom and subbing. Are there others that do that? Or are you the pioneer here?
There's a few legislators who were teachers. There was this one that he's not there anymore, but he technically was still a teacher, but I don't understand how he could have done that. I don't think he was really teaching. I think they kept him on the payroll for some reason, but I don't know anybody else that subs.
Hmm.
I think other legislators go in and like, look at schools, but
Yeah.
I always say like going in as an elected official is much, much different than, because when I sub, I don't go in there like, hi, I'm Representative von Haefen. I'm here to sub. Like I always say, I'm kind of like undercover boss. Like I just go in like as Julie or Miss von Haefen. And I mean, it's kind of cool because some teachers do recognize me and they'll be like, wait, like I know who you are. Like I just subbed. Emily, I don't know if I told you, I just subbed I've been subbing at Project Enlightenment.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Oh,
like
We'll have
I've subbed there like 3 times in the
in the
last 2 weeks.
demonstration preschool
Yeah,
or
in the
in
pre-K
the
class.
oh, in the pre-K class. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, it was funny because like the first day, like all three, like the two teachers like recognized me. And then like one of them like DM'd me on Instagram, like, I knew that was you. Like, so I was like, so it's fun to do it, but like I think that it just gives you like a really clear picture of like what's going on in the classroom. And, again, like for you guys, like I know Mel, you were saying about like kids with behavior issues. I mean, the reason that I'm subbing in that class is that these 4 or 5 year olds, there's some that have really severe behavioral problems. And these teachers are heroes, being with these kids every day and hearing these kids' stories, about kind of where they're coming from and the experiences that they've had at home and stuff, it makes me just admire teachers and mental health professionals like
Mhm.
you guys, even more. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for doing that because I know when we used to proctor EOGs,
Yeah.
I remember thinking like this should be required for all
Yes.
legislators or like NCDPI, like all the people making the decisions about the testing, this should be required because it is like mind numbing. Like those
Yes.
3 or 4, sometimes 5 hours of just being in a room, handing out pencils, watching kids stay quiet. Like it's
I remember those
terrible.
days.
It's terrible. Yeah, so it gives you such a perspective that I'm just really grateful that you do that, and I admire that so much about you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you for
So
supporting Project Enlightenment with showing up and not volunteering, sorry.
they paid me.
Yeah.
They
Subbing.
do. They
Subbing.
do. It's close to volunteer work, I
Yeah.
think, honestly. Um, Thank you for supporting early intervention too.
Yeah.
A lot of
That's
people don't know.
my favorite
Yeah,
age is that
yeah.
age. So
It's a fun age, and
yeah,
the early intervention matters so much. And that's our public education money at work too, right? And that can really change
absolutely.
the trajectory of a life. So thanks for doing it.
Yeah. And it just, also set me in kindergarten. I know how important it is to have that, like, that pre-K year and I was telling somebody, like, it's not even like we're teaching them. I mean, we are teaching them, but it's mostly about social skills.
Yeah.
It's the standing in line, it's the opening the milk, it's all those things that when they get to kindergarten, then the teacher isn't having to deal with that. They can, can't handle like the getting along with their peers and all that kind of stuff a little bit better. So
Hmm.
yeah, it's been great. But I thought just to share real quick, I thought you guys would appreciate, not appreciate, but like I'm saving the story for when we vote on a gun bill at school, or not at school, at the legislature. One day that I was there subbing, we had to do a lockdown drill with
It, pro-
4-year-olds.
with 4-year-olds.
Yes, it was so horrible. Like, I'm just like, oh my gosh, we're putting these kids through this. And we had to go, the teachers were great. Like, so they did the lockdown drill and they're like, okay, everyone, we're going to go in the closet and like watch a movie and we have to be very quiet. And so, we had to sit in this like storage closet in the pitch dark. And these kids, some of them, that would be really scary,
Hmm.
right? I mean, I'm sure a lot of them. And they were so good. And like the teacher had her cell phone, and we just like, had this little, but you have to be quiet too. The whole experience, it made me want to cry, just
Yeah.
like that we were putting 4-year-olds through this. And I don't know if they really understood what we were doing. They didn't say like, this is why we're doing it. They didn't really go into it. They're just like, we just need to be safe for a few minutes, that kind of thing. But the whole thing is just like, what are we doing?
What are
It's
we
just,
doing?
yeah.
And
So,
that's a
Yeah.
perspective you don't get unless you have your boots on the ground,
yeah.
right?
And
Like you
seeing those
need to live
kids,
it
yeah,
with
in
the
that
kids to know how these decisions are impacting the kids.
that dark closet, I will never forget that. Like having 15 kids in this dark, pitch dark storage closet, while we huddled and, I mean, thank God it was just a drill, but it was just horrifying. So,
It
Mm.
is.
anyway.
Yeah. Emily, have you had to do a lockdown drill in your
I
work in school psychology?
I mean, yeah, when I was a school psychologist, and I still remember so I was a school psychologist in Houston, Texas, and everyone has a gun in Texas. And so we were trained to like ask parents, not do you have a gun in the home, but how is your gun stored in the home? Like that's how we were trained to talk about it. This was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And I remember I didn't think about it as much in the elementary and middle schools I was in because at that point there had only been school shootings in high schools. But I remember being in my office in the high school and just always thinking about like what I would do, where I would go, um, where I would hide. And I was in a position where I wasn't responsible for a whole classroom, but I walked around the school a lot, and so I was in a lot of different places. And then I was usually either with one-on-one with a student or in a small group. Um, so it was always a different scenario. So I never had like one plan. So I
Yeah.
would like always be thinking about it,
That's
which
traumatic.
is totally traumatic in and of
Yeah.
itself. And what I say all the time when I talk about school violence, it's not about the actual violence. It's about us living in this fear or hypervigilance or anticipation of at any moment it could happen. And I feel that when I drop my kids off at school every day. Like that's just how we live now, which is awful, right? It's
Yeah.
awful. I've written
I,
about this before, and yeah, it's just I was a junior in college when Columbine happened. So I think I'm kind of the last generation that went to school without thinking about this. But our kids, like, they just know it could happen. And I
Yep,
know
and
we've
yeah.
all
here,
had situations where we've talked to our kids about lockdown drills, yeah.
yep,
Or real ones.
yeah. And
Yeah.
the kids, when I was in the public school doing my internship, right, I saw them hold the weight of these lockdown drills and how the behaviors ticked up
Hmm.
after that. And my own kiddos, it's heavy stuff. It's just more weight in their emotional backpack that they carry around.
Yep.
Yeah. And we're starting that at such an early age, like even if they don't quite understand that, like maybe they'll have a memory of, oh yeah, now I know why we were in that closet, and that kind of thing. It makes me sad. I mean, of course, like through PTA and all kinds of things, like I've learned so much about ACEs and like toxic stress
Hmm.
and like that kind of, thinking like you were saying, Emily, about just thinking all the time like what would happen. I mean that's keeps that part of your brain active all the time, and it shouldn't be. So yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to pivot. Okay.
Yeah, we
So
got we got
what are
7 minutes.
Okay.
fabulous. So ways people can get involved is reach out to PTA, start showing up in the classroom if they've got the bandwidth. There are a lot of families who don't have that bandwidth. My parents don't, right? They are working, they are doing the best to survive the day, and there might be another tough situation that they're dealing with at night. What's a 15-minute thing they can do between now and election time to help them show up at the polls when they do?
I mean, if they're willing to, share their story, with a legislator, whether it's theirs or somebody else's, like, and not just, I know a lot of groups like do this, click here to send this, message to your legislator or whatever. Those aren't that effective, to be honest. Like I get a lot of those, and I kind of stop reading them after a while if they're kind of a form letter. But if I get like a personal email from a parent or a teacher about, just telling their story, like that is so much like 100 times more effective than clicking a button, to send a form email. You're probably, for me, you're going to get a personal response back, about thank you for, sharing what you've been going through, so that could just take 15 minutes. I know maybe at the end of the day, they're just like, I don't want to share my story again. Like, this is exhausting. But so if you don't want to do that, I guess I would just say, like, making sure that you're informed about like your candidates, like what issues are important to you. Follow people on social media, like you guys and
Hmm.
myself. Because we post a lot about different things. So if you can just watch, a 2, 3 minute reel on an
Hmm.
issue, like, hey, if that's all you can do for the day, like at least you learn more about this. And there's so many great groups out
Hmm.
there that are doing, great informative things about education and mental health and all kinds of different things. So I would just say, like, seek those out. And, I think another thing that people don't realize is how important like your voice is to your network. And so, like, if you're just like, hey, if election day is coming up, like texting 5 of your friends and just being like, hey, did you vote today? Or when are you going to vote? And, that kind of thing, they call that like personal organizing or relational organizing when you're just organizing among your own friends and network. And that, just if I like t called Emily and was like, "Hey, are you voting today?" Like she's probably a lot more likely to do it than if just some
Hmm.
random stranger called her from a campaign, right? So
Yep.
that relationship really matters. So I think all those things, can really make a difference in the long run.
That's a
Awesome.
good one. All you mamas are on some group
Yeah.
text with all your other mama friends. So,
Yes. And if
Yeah,
you're like, hey, follow Dr. Emily, like she has this great, information, like that's all you need to do, or follow Julie or
yep.
Mel or whatever, I just think that people don't realize that how powerful that can be.
Hmm.
absolutely. Thank you.
Cool. Cool,
Super
y'all.
helpful.